Let me ask you something most people are too afraid to admit. Have you ever given everything to someone only to feel invisible in return? You gave your time, your attention, your affection, your whole emotional being because deep down you believe love was earned through effort. But here's the truth. No one tells you obsession is never created by giving more. True obsession is born in the spaces you don't fill. It doesn't start when you pour yourself into someone. It begins when your presence makes them question themselves. Not because you fed their ego, but because you awakened something in them they hadn't yet claimed. Let me explain. We live in a world that tells us, if you want someone to want you, give them more love, more messages, more of you. And so we chase, we explain, we overextend. But what if that's the very thing that keeps you stuck in cycles of being overlooked? What if your power isn't in how much you give, but in how deeply you withhold? I'm not talking about manipulation. I'm talking about magnetism. Let me share something with you, something I've learned from both ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience. People don't remember what you say. They remember how your presence made them feel about themselves. And here's where the paradox begins. If you want a man to become obsessed with you, don't flatter his ego, disrupt it. Disrupt the part of him that wants comfort without growth. Challenge the version of him that survives on performance instead of purpose. Don't chase his attention. Elevate your presence. Because what a man truly obsesses over is not validation, but the version of himself he sees when he's with a woman who doesn't need him to feel complete, the woman who doesn't dance for approval, who doesn't beg to be seen, who simply exists, rooted, whole, still. And in that stillness, something begins to break. Now, let's be real. The ego is not evil. It's not the villain in this story. The ego is a mirror. It reflects how we see ourselves through others. And for most men, ego is the loudest voice in the room. It drives behavior, shapes identity, protects vulnerability. But when a man meets a woman who doesn't react to his ego, doesn't validate it, doesn't fear it, he doesn't forget her, he replays her. Why? Because she becomes a mystery his ego can't solve. And the more still she becomes, the louder her absence echoes. You see, obsession isn't born in presence, it's born in absence. Not in giving everything, but in giving nothing that isn't aligned with your truth. And this is where most of us struggle, because we think if we love harder, they'll stay. If we try harder, they'll change. If we explain enough, they'll understand. But love doesn't work like that. Love, true love, is not about how much you bend to fit into someone's life. It's about how deeply you are rooted when the winds of ego start to blow. And make no mistake, they will blow because when your presence is powerful, when your silence speaks louder than any words ever could, it unsettles those who aren't ready to meet themselves. There's a story I once heard in a monastery in the Himalayas. A young man came to the master, heartbroken. "She shattered me," he said. "Her silence destroyed me." The master didn't react. He just smiled and said, "No, her silence didn't shatter you. It revealed the parts of you that were already broken." The young man grew angry. "So she's not to blame?" "No," the master said. "Pain is a teacher. Don't blame the teacher for showing you what you still need to learn." And I'll never forget that. You see, when you stop reacting to someone's ego, when you withdraw emotional permission from their lower self, you stop becoming a participant in their drama and you become a mirror instead. Not a mirror of who they pretend to be, but of who they could become. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Because when you reflect potential instead of praising performance, it forces the other person to rise or retreat. And whichever path they choose, you win. Because you're no longer performing to be loved. You're standing in your truth and letting love meet you there. Now, before we move on, I want to ask you a question. Not just to hear it, but to feel it. What version of yourself are you reflecting to the people around you? Are you showing up as someone who needs validation to feel seen? Or are you willing to be so deeply still, so deeply rooted, that others feel the weight of your absence when you're no longer there? Because obsession is not created by force. It is invited by alignment. And that's where your real power begins. If this message resonates with you, if you're ready to stop reacting and start reflecting, drop a comment below. .yo. Like, share, and subscribe. And most of all, thank you. Thank you for choosing growth, for choosing your presence over performance, for becoming the kind of person whose silence is unforgettable. This is just the beginning. Let's go deeper. Here's something most people never realize until it's too late. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to chase to be chosen. And you don't need to prove yourself to be powerful. In fact, the loudest voice in the room is often the most insecure. But the one who sits in silence, who breathes slowly through discomfort, who doesn't react when others try to provoke them, that person becomes a force the world can't ignore. Stillness is not passivity. Stillness is power. It's not the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of it. Let me tell you the truth about emotional stillness. Most people mistake it for indifference. They say, she doesn't care, or he's being cold. But emotional non-reaction isn't about being numb. It's about being grounded. It's about becoming a calm eye in the middle of someone else's storm. Let's break this down. When you stay still while someone else is emotionally thrashing, you become the mountain. You stop trying to fix their weather. You just remain unshakable. And that stillness, that calmness, it starts to unravel the very ego that thought it was in control. Let's go deeper. Every time you react from emotion, every time you raise your voice, argue, justify, over-explain, you're giving someone access to your energy. You're saying, here, take my peace, you control how I feel. But when you respond with stillness, with calm clarity instead of chaos, you reclaim something sacred. Sovereignty. And it's not just spiritual, it's scientific. There's a set of cells in your brain called mirror neurons. These neurons make us mimic the emotional states of others automatically. It's why you yawn when someone else does. It's why one person's panic can set off a whole room. But here's the power. When you remain emotionally grounded, you become the regulator. You teach others' nervous systems to calm down without ever saying a word. You don't tell them to relax. You become the relaxation. You don't tell them to be still. You embody stillness. And the moment you stop feeding chaos, the ego runs out of fuel. I once spoke with a woman who had been in an emotionally turbulent relationship. Her partner was charming but reactive. When he felt threatened, he'd raise his voice. When he felt guilty, he'd go silent. When he felt distant, he'd suddenly flood her with affection. And for years, she thought love was the dance of decoding him. But one day, something inside her changed. She said, I stopped chasing the drama. I stopped decoding his silences. I stopped explaining myself. Instead, she focused on her breath, her posture, her inner stillness. And do you know what happened? He panicked. Not because she left, but because she stayed without reacting. He came to her and asked, do you even care anymore? She replied, I care, deeply, but I no longer react from fear. I listen more to your energy than to your words. And in that moment, he wasn't just heard. He was seen, not flattered, not blamed, seen. And that level of reflection, it's unforgettable. To disrupt a man's ego, to genuinely invite transformation, you don't need to attack him. You don't need to insult, belittle, or control him. That's not power. That's pain speaking. True power, it's when your energy becomes so rooted in truth that the false parts of him have nowhere left to hide. It's when your stillness creates such a contrast with his chaos that he can't ignore his own behavior anymore. He might flinch. He might resist. He might even pull away. But if he has the capacity to grow, he won't run from that reflection. He'll obsess over it, not because you manipulated him, but because you revealed a version of himself he's not used to seeing. Let me say this plainly. Stillness disarms ego. Stillness rewires emotional patterns. Stillness changes the game, but it's not easy because we've been conditioned to associate love with reaction, to believe silence means something's wrong, to believe space is rejection, to believe if I'm not constantly showing up, I'll be forgotten. But silence is not rejection. It's instruction. When you stop reacting to someone's triggers, you're no longer a mirror for their chaos. You become a mirror for their growth. And that's what shifts everything. But here's where it gets hard. Stillness is most powerful when it's tested. When someone pulls away and every fiber of your being wants to run after them, when they get cold and your impulse is to warm them up with your overgiving, when they raise their voice and you want to defend yourself, explain, argue, but you don't. You breathe, you return to yourself, you stay rooted. And in that moment, you stop playing the role of fixer, pleaser, chaser, and you step into the role you were always meant to embody. Yourself, your stillness becomes the invitation, not for him to worship you, but for him to meet himself. And in that mirror, he must decide, will I rise to match this presence? Or will I retreat to protect my ego? Either way, your path stays the same. You don't lower your vibration to be understood. You don't perform to be seen. You simply stay, rooted, wise. Let me leave you with this. Stillness is the loudest message you will ever send. It says, I do not need to chase you to be chosen. I do not need to perform to be powerful. And I do not need to react to be relevant, because the woman who holds stillness becomes the mirror that reveals the truth. And whether he stays, runs, or grows, she remains unforgettable. Let's get real for a moment. We live in a world where attention is the new currency, not money, not status, not even love. Attention, where you place it, you give power. What you focus on, you feed. And what you constantly give without awareness, you devalue. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A man doesn't become obsessed with the woman who gives him everything. He becomes obsessed with the woman who gives with intention, not the one who's always available, not the one who over-explains, not the one who pours from a place of emotional scarcity, but the one who knows that her attention has weight, that her presence isn't casual. That being seen by her is a privilege, not a guarantee. You see, obsession isn't created by flooding someone with your energy. It's created when your energy becomes rare. What is always available becomes invisible. What is earned becomes treasured. This is human psychology. There's a principle called hedonic adaptation, the tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of comfort even after something good happens. At first, your love feels like a gift. Your attention feels exciting. Your presence feels magnetic. But over time, if there's no boundary, no breath, no space, you become background noise. Not because you've changed, but because your energy was never framed with intention. Think about it like this. Imagine hearing your favorite song on repeat every hour, every day, non-stop. No matter how good it is, eventually you stop hearing it. It blends into the environment, and attention works the same way. When it's constant, unfiltered, unearned, it loses its impact. It's not that you're not valuable. It's that you've forgotten to honor your own energy. There's a story I often reflect on. A woman gave everything to the man she loved. Her time, her presence, her energy, her devotion. And for a while, he adored her. But slowly his response dulled. Her presence became expected. She started to feel invisible in the very place she gave everything. One day, she stopped overgiving. She stopped chasing. She stopped explaining. She didn't punish. She didn't disappear. She simply reclaimed her energy. She started tending to her own inner world. And suddenly, he noticed, suddenly, he missed her. He said, "You feel far away." And she said something I'll never forget. "I'm not far away. I'm just no longer constantly arriving in your world. I've arrived in mine." That's not distance. That's sovereignty. So here's the key. Your attention is not neutral. It's not free. It's not infinite. Where you place your life force. And when a man senses that your attention is no longer dictated by his behavior, when he feels that your emotional energy doesn't rise and fall based on how he shows up, something inside him shifts. First, there's confusion, then discomfort, then, if he's ready, growth. Why? Because you've created a vacuum, and the ego hates a vacuum. The ego craves a constant mirror, validation, reassurance, reaction. But when your attention becomes selective, when you stop handing out emotional energy like free samples at a supermarket, the ego panics. It starts performing, explaining, provoking. It tries to win back what it no longer controls. But here's where most people slip. The moment the other person escalates, they rush in to soothe, fix, explain, reassure. Why? Because they mistake their compassion for obligation. Because they confuse silence with rejection. But let me tell you something life-changing. Silence is not absence. It is instruction. It's your way of saying, my energy is sacred. It's not to be consumed mindlessly. It's not available on demand. It's earned. It's honored. It's intentional. And listen, this isn't about playing games. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's not about creating distance to manipulate. It's about restoring value to your attention. Because when your energy is always on tap, you teach people to expect it, not to appreciate it. But when you begin to slow down, when you pause before reacting, when you stop explaining your worth, when you allow absence to do what presence couldn't, you change the entire emotional dynamic. Most women and men, too, don't realize this. Obsession isn't born out of presence. It's born out of what your presence represents. It's not about how much you do. It's about how your attention makes someone feel about themselves. And if your energy becomes associated with peace, clarity, and groundedness, suddenly it's not just desirable. It's necessary, not for validation, but for recalibration. A man might not understand it, but he'll feel it in your silence, in your stillness, in your boundaries. And that's what his soul will keep returning to. Not because you chased him, but because your absence held up a mirror. Let me say this clearly. What you allow, you teach. But what you embody, you transform. If your energy communicates neediness, he'll respond to that. If your attention is reactive, he'll control the rhythm of your relationship. But if your energy radiates self-respect, if your attention is grounded in awareness, you teach him to rise. You don't demand it. You don't force it. You simply become the contrast. And contrast is what the mind remembers. So I want to ask you today, what has your attention been feeding? Your fear? Your need for validation? Your desire to be chosen? Or your peace? Your growth? Your sacred self-worth? Because you teach people how to value you. Not by what you say, but by where you place your focus. Your attention is your life. Spend it wisely. Let it become the standard by which others learn how to honor you. Let it be the mirror in which a man must confront his own reflection. And from that reflection, he will either evolve or exit, but either way, you've won. Because the woman who honors her attention never loses herself. Let's talk about devotion, not infatuation, not lust, not possession, devotion. that steady, grounded, unshakable force that makes a man not just desire you, but respect you, rise for you, and stay with you long after the butterflies fade. But here's the paradox most people never understand. Devotion doesn't come from comfort. It comes from polarity. It's not created when everything is easy and effortless. It's not birthed in moments of constant harmony and praise. True devotion is formed in the tension between two opposing forces, emotional safety and inspired challenge. Let me explain. If a man only feels safe with you, he gets comfortable. And comfort without challenge creates stagnation. If a man only feels challenged by you, he gets overwhelmed. And challenge without safety creates trauma. But when he feels both, when your presence says, you are seen as you are, but I also see who you could be, something powerful happens. He begins to evolve. Not because you're molding him, but because your energy calls out his higher self. There's an ancient parable I love. A fearless warrior meets a healer in the mountains. He's strong, trained, respected, but something about her unsettles him. She doesn't chase him. She doesn't flatter him. She doesn't try to tame him. She simply lives peacefully, powerfully, intentionally. He watches her. One day he says, "Why don't you try to win me over?" And she replies, "Because I do not seek to possess what is not ready to stay." That silence, it shook him. He left. But when he returned, he'd laid down his sword, not for her approval, but because her presence showed him that his strength didn't need to come from domination. It could come from discipline, from stillness, from self-respect. That is the kind of polarity that creates devotion, not performance, not people-pleasing, not manipulation, but a feminine presence that refuses to collapse under pressure and refuses to puff up in fear. It simply stands in truth, quiet, unwavering, and clear. So many people think love is about being nice, about being agreeable, about never making anyone uncomfortable. But love without honesty isn't love. It's appeasement. And appeasement creates attachment, but it does not create devotion. You don't create lasting love by making someone feel powerful. You create it by making someone feel seen and invited to grow. But here's the key. You don't invite them with your words. You invite them with your energy, your boundaries, your alignment, your emotional clarity. That is what forms polarity. I want to speak to every woman who's ever been told, "You're too much. You're too intense. You make things too complicated." You're not too much. You're simply not willing to shrink for someone who refuses to grow. And that's not arrogance. That's integrity. The men who feel overwhelmed by your depth are the ones who've only practiced love in the shallow end. But a man who's ready for devotion, he's not intimidated by your standards. He's inspired by them because he doesn't want to be coddled. He wants to be called forward, not through criticism, not through control, but through contrast, through the subtle yet undeniable realization that your energy demands presence, not performance. And yes, there will be men who leave. Some will feel shaken. Some will feel exposed. Some will accuse you of being cold, distant, too much, too difficult. Let them go. Let them find the mirrors that reflect their comfort zones. You are not that mirror. You are the mirror that reflects their potential. And not everyone is ready to face that. But the man who is, he will rise not to impress you, but to finally meet himself in your presence. You see, polarity is not about playing games. It's about energetic clarity. It's the moment when your silence speaks louder than begging. When your boundary says, "Not until you are ready to meet me where truth lives." And that moment, that pause, that space, that's what separates attraction from devotion. There's another story I often return to. A woman loved a man who oscillated between desire and detachment. One day he would shower her with attention. The next, he would vanish into his own emotional distance. For years, she chased the highs, tried to fix the lows, until she realized his inconsistency was not her responsibility to heal. She stopped performing, stopped explaining, stopped rescuing. And when he asked, "Why don't you react anymore?" she looked him in the eyes and said, "Because I no longer reward chaos with my attention, and I no longer confuse pain with passion." That right there, that was the end of performance and the beginning of real polarity. So how do you cultivate this kind of energy? You stop collapsing. You stop softening your truth to make someone else comfortable. You stop apologizing for wanting depth, presence, and accountability. And instead, you become the woman who says, "You are safe here, but only if you rise here." That's not ego. That's embodied love. It says, "You may rest in my presence, but only if you respect what I've built within myself." Polarity is sacred. It's the tension that awakens a man, not because it pressures him, but because it reveals him. You show him his edges. You show him his gaps, not with shame, but with silence, not with demands, but with standards. And that contrast, that's what he obsesses over, not because you're hard to get, but because you're hard to forget. Let me leave you with this. The woman who embodies both warmth and strength doesn't need to say much. Her presence does the inviting, her boundaries do the refining, and her energy, it does the remembering. This is the woman men devote to, not because they're controlled, but because they're called forward by someone who never needed to chase. Let's begin with a truth most people spend years avoiding. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you embody. Read that again. You don't attract with your words. You don't attract with your dreams. You don't attract with how badly you want someone to love you. You attract through your energy, through the way you carry yourself, through the silent, unspoken language of your embodiment. And for so many women, this is the missing link. You've done the work. You've read the books. You've listened to the podcasts. You've tried to heal the patterns. But when you walk into a room, your energy still whispers, "Please choose me. Please see me. Please tell me I'm enough." And it's not your fault. This world has trained you to perform for love instead of receive it. But let me tell you something deeply important. Feminine power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be clear. It doesn't yell. It doesn't beg. It doesn't rush into the silence because stillness feels scary. It simply walks into the room with breath, with calm, with a kind of grounded presence that says, "I'm here and I know exactly who I am." That's the woman people remember. That's the woman men obsess over, not because she chases, but because she chooses herself first. Now, let me ask you this. When was the last time you paid attention to your posture? Not your outfit, not your makeup, not your hairstyle. I'm talking about your energetic posture. Do you lean forward in conversations trying to get closer? Do your shoulders roll in trying to take up less space? Does your voice rise slightly at the end of sentences asking for permission to exist? Because here's what I want you to know. Your body speaks louder than your words. If your breath is shallow, if your tone trembles, if your eye contact disappears, you're unconsciously telling the world, "I don't trust myself." But when your shoulders are relaxed, your breath is full, your tone is calm and slow, your energy says something different. "I belong here. I am not waiting to be chosen. I've already chosen myself." And that energy, it's magnetic. I once met a woman in Mumbai. She wasn't conventionally beautiful. She didn't wear flashy clothes. She didn't command the room with volume, but everyone noticed her. Why? Because she didn't need the room. The room leaned toward her. She wasn't chasing anyone's attention. She wasn't adjusting her energy to make others comfortable. She was simply rooted in herself, in her rhythm, in her presence. And every man in the room either rose to meet her frequency or quietly walked away. Not because she rejected them, but because she filtered them with her energy. You see, The embodied feminine doesn't audition for love. She doesn't overextend. She doesn't overexplain. She doesn't overgive because she's no longer trying to earn what she already islanded. She understands a sacred truth. Love given without boundaries is not strength. It's emotional supply. And supply without value becomes invisible. This is a hard truth, especially if you were raised to believe that love must be proven. That goodness must always be visible. That being needed means being worthy. But here's what the embodied woman knows. Need is not love. Drama is not depth. And performance is not presence. So how do you return to your embodied feminine energy? Not with strategy, not with scripting your texts, not with waiting 3 hours to reply so he values you more, but with alignment. Step 1, start with your breath. If your breath is shallow, you are in survival. If your breath is deep, you are in connection. Breathe into your belly. Slow down the pace. Let your nervous system settle. This alone can shift you from people-pleasing to presence. Step 2, check your posture. Are you leaning forward to chase? Are you shrinking to hide? Are you puffing up to defend? Return to neutral. Stand tall. Let your spine lengthen, your chest open. Let your posture speak. I am home in myself. Step 3, use your voice intentionally. Speak slower, with clarity, not to dominate, but to direct. Let silence be your ally, not your enemy. Don't rush to fill it. Don't panic when it comes. Silence is sacred. And the woman who is unafraid of silence, she radiates emotional safety. And safety is what makes people feel seen. You see, obsession isn't created by being dramatic. It's created by being disruptively grounded. The kind of grounded that makes a man think, why does she feel different? Why do I feel safer around her, but also challenged? Why do I want to be a better man just standing next to her? It's not because you said anything profound. It's because your energy made him meet himself. Not the version he performs, not the version he shows the world, but the version that's becoming in your reflection. And yes, this level of embodiment means you'll trigger people. You'll unsettle those addicted to chaos. You'll confuse those who equate your calmness with coldness, but let them misunderstand you. Let them project. Let them fall away. Because you're not here to convince anyone of your worth. You're here to live it. There's a beautiful phrase in Eastern philosophy. When the soul is settled, the world becomes still. And when you become still emotionally, energetically, spiritually, your world changes. Men speak differently around you. Friends respect you differently. Life begins to respond to your presence because your presence has weight. Not because you yell, not because you demand, but because you've become so rooted in who you are that anyone who isn't aligned with that either rises to match it or walks away, and you remain still. So today, ask yourself, am I performing or am I present? Am I chasing or am I choosing? Am I trying to be loved or living from love? Because when you shift from effort to embodiment, everything changes. You don't pull, you don't push, you invite. And the man who is ready for that invitation, he won't just want you. He'll reverence you, not because you demanded it, but because your energy gave him no other choice. Let me ask you something powerful, something few ever pause to consider. What if the most powerful thing you could ever say is said in complete silence? Not the silence of withdrawal, not the silence of punishment, but the silence of sovereignty. Stillness isn't absence. Stillness is presence at its highest form. It's the difference between reacting from fear and responding from alignment. It's the quiet discipline that whispers, I no longer hand over my peace to prove a point. And that stillness, it's not weakness. It's not disconnection. It's a language so ancient, so magnetic, so commanding that the right man won't just hear it, he'll feel it in his bones. Here's what no one teaches you. Stillness doesn't just reflect emotional mastery, it creates transformation. When a man expects emotional chaos and meets calm, he's forced to sit with the only voice he can't escape, his own. And in that silence, he doesn't just remember you, he begins to remember himself. But let's be honest, most people aren't ready for this kind of energetic clarity. They're addicted to noise. They equate attention with love. They confuse drama with depth. They live in a cycle of emotional adrenaline, highs and crashes, closeness and withdrawal. And when you stop playing that game, when you don't match their escalation, when you no longer participate in the storm, you become unforgettable, not because of how loud you are, but because of how still you've become. There's a story I often return to. A woman used to argue with her partner constantly. Every disagreement spiraled into a full-blown battle, words, accusations, silent treatments, until one day she chose something different. She didn't disengage. She didn't punish. She simply became still. When he escalated, she breathed. When he provoked, she observed. When he withdrew, she didn't chase. And slowly, everything shifted. At first, he became frustrated. He pushed harder. He tested the old patterns. But when she refused to react, something profound happened. He softened. Why? Because in the absence of reactivity, he had to confront the impact of his own energy. Her stillness became the mirror. And that mirror, it didn't accuse him, it revealed him. Stillness doesn't provoke change by force. It invites change by reflection. And this is especially true for men, because many men have never known a calm that doesn't come with conditions. They've known silence as manipulation, or silence as abandonment, but not silence as truth. You see, the woman who can remain still in the presence of confusion, who can sit in her body without needing to be rescued, who can hold her energy without flinching, she becomes a sanctuary, not a performance, not a storm, but a space where a man can meet himself. But here's the key: stillness must be clean, because fake stillness, the kind laced with resentment, pride, or passive aggression, doesn't soothe. It provokes. True stillness has no agenda. It doesn't punish. It doesn't manipulate. It simply exists, like a mountain, like an ocean, like a flame that doesn't need wind to keep burning. Stillness is not about withdrawing your love. It's about raising your standard for how your love is received. This level of stillness, this kind of energetic language, requiert practice, because it's not what we're taught. We're taught to explain ourselves into exhaustion, to prove our worth through overgiving, to speak louder just to be heard. But the moment you stop over-explaining, the moment you stop performing emotional CPR for people not ready to breathe on their own, you become something rare. You become a woman who is not led by emotion, but by embodied awareness. And that's when your energy becomes the teacher. You no longer teach through advice. You teach through how you sit, how you breathe, how you respond. And men who are used to ego games, they don't know what to do with this, because they've built their confidence around being chased, fixed, or feared. And when you offer none of that, they meet the silence, and the silence reveals the truth. Stillness isn't passive. It's not avoidance. It's not coldness. It's not emotional disconnection. It's the pause that protects your peace. It's the choice to say, I will not teach you through anger. I will teach you through alignment. And that's a different kind of discipline, because it's easier to lash out. It's easier to spiral. It's easier to raise your voice. But power, real power, is when you raise your awareness instead. Now, let me be clear. Stillness doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It doesn't mean you shrink into silence when something needs to be said. Stillness isn't about self-abandonment. It's about self-containment. You say less, but what you say lands. You give less, but what you give matters. You react less, but your presence becomes magnetic. That's the power of stillness. And here's the beautiful part. Stillness doesn't just change your relationships. It changes you, because the more still you become, the more honest you become. You start to notice when your yes was actually fear, when your giving was actually a plea, when your silence was actually avoidance, not peace. And in that noticing, you evolve, because stillness gives you the space to observe yourself, to catch old patterns before they repeat, to choose clarity over chaos. You stop chasing closure. You stop needing to be right. You stop performing to feel seen. You simply breathe, and your breath tells the story for you. Let me end with this. Stillness is not something you do. It's something you become. You become the woman whose calmness is felt in the tension, whose silence carries truth, whose energy enters the room before her words ever do. And the right man, he won't just listen to your stillness. He'll learn from it. He'll grow through it. He'll return to it again and again, because your stillness becomes the language of love, spoken not with the lips, but with the soul. This is your final transformation. You don't chase. You don't collapse. You don't explain. You embody. And in that embodiment, obsession turns into reverence. Love turns into peace. And your stillness, it speaks louder than anything ever could.